Mid-sized California University, May 22, 2024. I am standing in a sea of black robes holding a grenade in the shape of a cell phone. My name is Alison Jensen, and the stadium around me shakes with the roar of proud parents, but all I feel is the cold vibration of a text message. My father just told me I am on my own. He thinks he is erasing me. He doesn't know that in exactly 10 seconds, I will answer a call that turns me into a billionaire and exposes the secret he tried to bury in the smoke. Listen to find out how I fought back. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The stadium was a cauldron of heat and noise, a sea of black polyester rippling under the California sun. Thousands of families were screaming, waving homemade signs, and blasting air horns as the announcer worked his way through the M's, his voice rolling over the crowd like distant thunder. I sat there sweating in my heavy master's gown, clutching my phone like it was a grenade I hadn't decided to throw yet. I should have been feeling pride or relief, or at least the exhaustion that comes after 6 years of sleepless nights and engineering labs. Instead, I felt cold. My phone had buzzed moments ago, vibrating against my palm with a violence that made me jump. It wasn't a congratulatory message. It was from my father. I looked down at the screen for the 10th time, the pixels glaring back at me with brutal clarity. "Don't expect help after this. We sacrificed everything for your brother. You're on your own." The words didn't just hurt. They were precise, calculated to cut exactly where I was weakest. My father had always turned the word sacrificed into a weapon, a way to threaten me into gratitude for a future I never wanted. He wielded it like an axe, hacking away at any part of me that didn't fit his narrative. Around me, classmates were high-fiving, adjusting their caps, laughing about post-grad trips to Europe or job offers in the Bay Area. I sat perfectly still, my fingers shaking over the cracked screen, as the announcer's voice boomed closer to my name. My own family would rather erase me than see me. It wasn't new. That text was just the final punctuation mark on a sentence they'd been writing since I was a child. I closed my eyes, and the stadium noise faded, replaced by the clatter of silverware on our kitchen table in the small, dusty town where I grew up. My father, a former firefighter turned county emergency coordinator, took up all the oxygen in the room. He was a man of loud opinions and heavy boots, and at dinner, his attention was a spotlight that only shone on one person, Michael. My brother was the golden boy, the star athlete, the firefighter in training who wore his varsity jacket like armor. "Did you see that tackle in the fourth quarter?" Dad would boom, slapping Michael on the back hard enough to rattle the plates. "That's instinct. You can't teach that. That's hero material right there." I would be sitting at the end of the table trying to make myself small, hiding a book on data structures, or a schematic for a weather sensor under my napkin. If I tried to speak, if I tried to show them the science fair ribbon I'd won for a wildfire prediction model, Dad would just laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh, it was a dismissal. "You can't fight a fire with a computer." "Allison," he'd say, rolling his eyes as he looked at my mother for backup. She would just smile tightly, conflict avoidant to a fault, and pass the potatoes. "Don't overthink things, Ali," she'd whisper. But I wasn't overthinking. I was observing. I heard what Dad told the relatives at barbecues when he thought I wasn't listening. "Michael's the one who'll carry this family. He's got the grit." Allison. She just floats. She's got her head in the clouds. Those were the subtle ambushes, the daily erosion of my confidence. But the real betrayal, the moment I learned what sacrifice actually meant to them, happened when I was 16. The Santa Ana winds had kicked up a hellscape of a fire season, and the ridge behind our house was burning. The evacuation order came in the middle of the night. The sky was an apocalyptic orange ash raining down like black snow. Dad went into command mode. "Grab what matters," he yelled. I ran to my room, grabbing the stack of research notebooks I'd spent 2 years filling data on wind patterns, humidity levels, historical burn rates. It was my life's work, clumsy but vital. When I got to the truck, Dad was loading Michael's football trophies. Armfuls of plastic gold statues. "There's no room for that junk, Allison," he barked, pointing at my notebooks. "We need space for the important things." He ripped the books from my hands and tossed them onto the driveway, throwing a bag of Michael's gear on top of the seat instead. I watched my research disappear into the smoke as we peeled out of the driveway. For years afterward, Dad told the story to anyone who would listen. "We sacrificed so much for our son's future," he'd say solemnly. "Saved every one of those trophies. Proof of what he can do." He never mentioned what he left behind. I realized then that I was the thing being sacrificed. I was the fuel he burned to keep Michael warm. The loudspeaker jolted me back to the present. Jeffrey Jacobs, Sarah Jenkins. They were getting closer. My heart hammered against my ribs. Dad had said I was on my own. What he didn't know was that I'd already built something without him. I had spent years constructing a life he couldn't touch, a fortress made of code and silicon. My phone buzzed again, distinct and urgent. I looked down. It wasn't my parents. It was a number I knew by heart, but one I never expected to see right now. It was the dedicated line for Emberline, the startup I'd built in the shadows. I hesitated. I was 3 people away from the stage. I was supposed to walk up there, shake the dean's hand, and pretend I was the dutiful daughter waiting for her parents' approval. But that text message had severed the last thread. The phone buzzed again, demanding attention. I looked at the stage, then at the glowing screen. I could walk toward the empty validation of a diploma my parents didn't care about, or I could answer the call that might change everything. My thumb hovered over the green button as the announcer took a breath, ready to say my name. I didn't step onto the graduation stage. Instead, I let the line of students shuffle past me, slipping out of the formation to stand in the shadow of a support pillar. To understand why I answered that phone instead of walking to the podium, you have to understand the life I had built in the margins, the life my parents knew nothing about. When I left home for college 4 years ago, I did it with a patchwork of partial scholarships, student loans, and a grim determination to never ask my father for a cent. I knew the family resources were reserved for Michael's gear, Michael's training, and Michael's comfort. While my brother was being groomed as the town's next great savior, I was working the graveyard shift as a lab assistant, scrubbing beakers and debugging code until my eyes burned. I lived on vending machine coffee and the adrenaline of independence. Every time I called home, the conversation followed a suffocating script. I would try to talk about my classes, about the complexity of fluid dynamics, or the beauty of predictive modeling. Dad would listen for maybe 10 seconds before interrupting. "That's nice, Allison, but your brother is out there fighting real fires. He's in the thick of it. Don't forget where the real courage is." Mom would chime in, her voice laced with that passive-aggressive worry that always felt like doubt. "We're just worried your degree won't make sense in the real world, honey. Computers are fine, but people need hands-on help." After a year of that, I stopped sharing. I realized you can't share your world with people who are actively trying to erase it. I buried myself in the work, and that's when the spark happened. Sophomore year, a brutal wildfire season tore through Northern California. I was volunteering remotely, processing emergency mapping data, and I saw the problem immediately. The county's prediction tools were ancient static models that couldn't account for shifting wind patterns in real time. People were losing their homes because the data was too slow. I stopped sleeping. I started coding. I built a rudimentary algorithm that scraped satellite imagery, wind sensor data, and topographical maps to predict fire spread. I called it Emberline. In early beta tests, it outperformed the official state models by a margin that scared me. My professors didn't just give me an A, they told me to incorporate. Emberline Technologies was born in a cramped, windowless co-working space that smelled permanently of stale pizza and overheating servers. I found my real family there. Raj Patel, a genius CTO who could make a server sing, and Emily Ward, an MBA student with a shark's instinct for business and a heart of gold. We built the company in secret, pitching quiet pilots to neighboring counties, running on fumes and faith. I deliberately kept my parents in the dark. Every time I had tried to show them my potential before Dad had ambushed me with lectures about real work and real sacrifice, I wasn't going to let him taint this. But the desire for validation is a sickness, and I relapsed once. It was Thanksgiving of my junior year. I had driven home exhausted but proud, armed with a tablet showing Emberline's interface. I sat them down at the kitchen table, the smell of turkey heavy in the air, and tried to explain. I showed them how the system could help parents evacuate sooner, how it could keep firefighters like Michael safer by predicting wind shifts. Dad didn't even look at the screen. He cut me off mid-sentence, his face darkening with annoyance. "Stop, Alison. Just stop." He slammed his hand on the table. "If you think I'm letting the county risk lives on some fancy app you coded between coffee runs, you're delusional. Michael's work is real. He's out there holding a hose line. Yours is a hobby." I froze. "It's not a hobby, Dad. It's science. It's safety. It's a distraction," he shouted. "We sacrificed everything for Michael's career because he has a future in this town. We don't have more to waste on you or your little games." The words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. I felt like I was 16 again, watching my notebooks burn. I looked at my mother, but she just stared at her plate, refusing to meet my eyes. That was the moment the door shut forever. I decided right then. Fine. If he wants me erased from his version of the story, I'll write my own somewhere else. I left that night and never brought up my work again. Which brought me back to the stadium, hiding behind a concrete pillar while my name was seconds away from being called. The phone in my hand was still buzzing. It was Emily. I slid my thumb across the screen, bringing the phone to my ear. Emily's voice was breathless, vibrating with an energy I had never heard before. "Allie, are you sitting down? I'm at graduation, Em. I'm about to walk." "What is it?" "Forget walking. Stop whatever you are doing." She took a jagged breath. "The IPO. It just went live. The market opened 10 minutes ago. Emberline's valuation didn't just hit the target. We broke every projection. We did it." My breath hitched. We had gone public that morning, a gamble we had been working toward for 18 months. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're a billionaire, Alison." The world tilted on its axis. The roar of the stadium seemed to drop away. At that exact moment, I looked up toward the entrance of the seating area. My parents were walking in. Dad looked impatient, checking his watch, while Mom smoothed her dress, scanning the crowd for the daughter they considered a disappointment. They had no idea that the girl they were looking for didn't exist anymore. Emily yelled through the phone, "You're not going to believe this, but the ticker just jumped again." I stared at my father's face across the crowd, the man who said I was on my own. He was right. I was on my own, and I was holding an empire in my hand. Emily's voice on the other end of the line was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear, but even the distance couldn't dampen the sheer hysteria of her joy. "Ali, are you listening? The opening bell was 20 minutes ago. The stock is climbing like a rocket. It's national news. Every major outlet is running the headline, 'Small-town engineer becomes tech titan.' We're not just a startup anymore. We're a unicorn. A decacorn. God, I don't even know the words for this level of money." The sheer volume of her excitement bled out into the crowded aisle where I was standing. A girl I knew from my fluid dynamics class, Kayla, turned around, her eyes wide. She had been adjusting her mortarboard, but now she was staring at me with a look of absolute shock. "Did she say billion?" She whispered the word, rippling through the small cluster of graduates around us. I couldn't speak. My chest felt tight, the air suddenly too thin. I looked up and saw my parents finally making their way down the stadium stairs. They looked out of place, scanning the rows with a mix of irritation and confusion, clearly wondering why their daughter wasn't in her seat, why there was a commotion bubbling up around where she should be. They didn't see a CEO. They saw a daughter making a scene. My phone buzzed again, cutting off my daze. It was Lena Ortiz, our head of PR. I switched lines, my fingers numb. "Lena, I can't talk. I'm at—" "You need to talk, Alison." Lena cut in, her voice professional but vibrating with adrenaline. "You are trending everywhere. They're spinning this as the ultimate local girl saves the West story. Reporters are already digging into your background. They found out about the donations." The air left my lungs. The donations. For the last 6 months, I had been quietly funneling Emberline's pre-IPO revenue into grants for rural fire departments specifically for buying out old, dangerous equipment and funding training. I had included my hometown in the first wave of grants anonymously. They know it was you, Lena continued. They're asking for a statement. They want to know how your family feels about their daughter saving the county's infrastructure. I watched my father spot me in the crowd. His brow furrowed, that familiar storm cloud gathering in his eyes. He started shoving past people to get to me. Lena, hold on, I whispered. But she kept talking, her voice dropping to a serious warning tone. There's something else, Ali. A reporter from the Times was digging into the county records to see why they hadn't adopted Emberline sooner. They found the meeting minutes from last year. There was a local official who aggressively blocked the contract. He threatened to resign if the county partnered with us. He called the tech reckless and unproven. The press is going to roast him. My stomach turned to ice. Who? I asked, though I already knew. County Emergency Coordinator Jensen, Lena said. Your father. The world stopped. The noise of the stadium, the cheering graduates, the feedback from the speakers, it all vanished into a high-pitched ring. My father hadn't just dismissed my work at the dinner table. He hadn't just ignored me. He had actively used his political power to try and kill the very thing I built. He had tried to block a system that could save the lives of the people he claimed to protect, all because it came from the daughter he wanted to erase. Alison! Dad's voice barked, shattering the moment. He was there standing in the aisle, face red with the exertion of the stairs and the embarrassment of the scene. What is this circus? Why are people staring at you? Get to your seat. He looked at the phone in my hand with disdain. Put that away. This is a ceremony, not one of your little phases. Something inside me snapped. It was a quiet snap, like a dry twig breaking in a dead forest. I didn't lower the phone. Instead, I pressed the speaker button. Lena, I said, my voice steady, say that part about the donation fund again. Lena's voice, amplified and crisp, cut through the air between us. Your donation fund for rural families who lose homes is being called Revolutionary, Alison. The press is saying you've turned your small-town trauma into a national solution. They're calling you the youngest woman to lead a wildfire tech IPO above $1 billion. The words hung there. Billion. Revolutionary. Solution. The people in the rows nearest to us went dead silent. My mother's hands flew to her mouth. My father's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Suddenly, a woman with a press badge and a camera crew, local news, who had been covering the graduation, pushed through the crowd, recognizing the scene. The lens swung toward us. Ms. Jensen, the reporter called out, thrusting a microphone forward. We just got the newswire. How does it feel to know your work could save your own hometown and your parents? She turned the mic toward my stunned father. You must be incredibly proud. How does it feel to see Emberline succeed? My father straightened up, his instinct to control the narrative kicking in. He opened his mouth, a smile fake, and practiced plastering onto his face, ready to take credit for the daughter he had just told was on her own. I stepped in front of him. I didn't shove him, but I moved into his space, blocking him from the camera, blocking him from the light. My family always told me my work didn't matter. I said, my voice clear and calm, looking directly into the lens. They told me they sacrificed everything for my brother's future. Today, I learned my own father tried to block the very system that will protect this county's children. The reporter gasped. The crowd was listening now, really listening. So I can't speak for how he feels. I continued, feeling the weight of 20 years lift off my shoulders. But I can say this, I won't let anyone erase what we built. Alison, Dad hissed behind me, panic edging into his voice. You're twisting this. I turned my back on him. I didn't look at his crumbling expression or my mother's tears. I looked at the security guard waving me toward the exit where my team was waiting. I started walking, leaving him standing there, exposed, small and utterly powerless against the truth. Security ushered me through a heavy steel door and into the concrete labyrinth beneath the stadium bleachers. The roar of the crowd was instantly muffled, replaced by the hum of industrial air conditioning and the clicking of high heels on cement. My team was waiting for me in a makeshift green room used for visiting coaches. Emily, Raj, and Lena looked up as I entered, their faces a mixture of exhilaration and terrified concern. They had just watched their CEO torch her family dynamics on live television. Ali Raj started stepping forward. "We saw the feed. That was intense." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Lena was already typing furiously on her tablet. "We're managing the fallout. The evil dad angle is gaining traction, but we need to be careful. We don't want it to look like a vindictive stunt. Some people are saying we ambushed you with the news." "You didn't ambush me," I said, grabbing a bottle of water. The timing was brutal, but it was perfect. It forced the truth out. "So how do we handle the revelation about the county official blocking the contract?" Lena asked, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Do we confirm it's your father officially?" I looked at them, my chosen family. The people who had believed in my code when my own bloodline saw it as a threat. "We don't bury the truth," I said firmly. "Not about wildfires, and not about who tried to stop us. If they ask, we confirm the public record. We don't spin it." Before Lena could reply, the door opened. A security guard nodded to me. "They're here, Ms. Jensen, like you asked." I took a breath. "Send them in." My parents walked in first. Dad looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His face was a mask of fury struggling against humiliation. Mom looked small, clutching her purse like a shield. "You have some nerve," Dad spat the moment the door clicked shut. The echo was sharp in the small room. "Embarrassing me like that, in front of my community, in front of the press." "I didn't say anything that wasn't true," I replied, leaning against the conference table. "I didn't offer them a seat." "You made me look like a villain," he shouted, pointing a finger at me. The old authority was there, but it felt hollow now. "I fought that contract because of real-world risks, Alison. I was protecting the county from unproven technology. I was doing my job. I didn't argue. I just unlocked my phone and pulled up the file Lena had sent me. Protecting the county," I asked. "Is that why you wrote this in an email to the board regarding Emberline's proposal?" I read aloud, my voice steady. "This is a toy project by a student who doesn't understand the reality of fire. It's a dangerous distraction. If we allocate funds to this, I will tender my resignation." I looked up. Dad's face went slack. He recognized his own words. "You didn't just doubt me," I said, the realization settling in my chest like a stone. "You tried to erase me from this town's future, from the story of how we keep people alive. You were willing to quit your job just to make sure I failed." Mom let out a sob. "Alison, please. I just didn't understand the tech. We thought you were confused. We were trying to help." I turned to her, my gaze softening only slightly. "You didn't have to understand the tech to see I was trying, Mom. You just had to ask. You never asked. Not once." The door opened again, and Michael slipped in. He was still in his dress uniform, looking uncomfortable. He looked from Dad's red face to my calm stance. He knew the lay of the land. He'd been reading the room his whole life. "Michael," Dad said, looking for an ally. Tell her how dangerous it is to rely on computers out there." Michael looked at me. Then he looked at the screen on the wall where a muted news channel was showing Emberline's fire spread simulations that were currently predicting the safety of his own station. "The guys at the station, they've been using the beta app on their personal phones for months, Dad," Michael said quietly. Dad whipped around. "What?" "It works," Michael said, his voice low. "It saved a crew near the ridge last week. They got the alert 10 minutes before the radio call." He looked at me, shame coloring his cheeks. I should have had your back more, Ali." It was an apology, but it was small. It was the apology of someone who waits until the wind changes to set his sails. I nodded, acknowledging it, but I didn't absolve him. Dad looked between us, realizing he was losing the room. He was losing the narrative. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "Alison," he said, his voice cracking. "Don't go on TV talking about me, please. You'll destroy my reputation. I've given 40 years to this town. You'll threaten everything I built." He was begging. The man who had been a giant in my childhood was suddenly just a terrified old man afraid of being seen. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I didn't want to destroy him. That would require me to care about his opinion, and I finally didn't. "I'm not out to destroy you, Dad," I said. "I won't name you in the national interviews. I won't make you the center of my story." He exhaled, relieved, but I continued, hardening my voice. "I won't lie. I won't protect the version of you that tried to erase me. If the truth ambushes your reputation, that's on you. If people find the records, I won't deny them." I pushed off the table and walked toward the door. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't wait for a hug that wouldn't come, or a thank you I didn't need. As I stepped back into the hallway, the air felt cleaner. My phone buzzed. It was Lena. "National Evening Show wants you tonight. Lead segment. They're calling you the woman who turned her hometown's biggest fear into its greatest defense." I looked back at the closed conference room door. My parents and brother were still in there, sitting in the silence I had left behind. I turned away and started walking toward the exit lights. I had a story to tell, and for the first time, I was the only one holding the pen. The studio lights were blinding, a stark contrast to the shadowy graduation bleachers where my life had pivoted only hours before. I sat across from the host of the country's most watched evening news program, my hands folded calmly in my lap. The makeup artist had tried to cover the exhaustion under my eyes, but I asked her to leave it. I wanted the world to see the work. The interview wasn't an interrogation, it was a coronation. The host leaned in, her voice practiced and warm, framing me as the embodiment of American resilience, the small-town girl who turned a personal obsession into a shield for the entire West Coast. She asked about my childhood, about the origins of Emberline. I didn't lie, but I didn't name names. I talked about growing up in the path of smoke, about the terror of evacuation, and about the crushing feeling that my ideas were invisible. "You built this system to fight wildfires," the host said, nodding sympathetically. "But it sounds like you were fighting a battle on two fronts." I looked directly into the camera, knowing exactly who was watching back home. "Some of the hardest fires I've ever had to fight weren't in the hills," I said, my voice steady. "They were in my own living room. I had to learn that just because the people closest to you don't see your value, it doesn't mean you're invisible." The fallout was immediate, but not in the way my father had feared. He wasn't destroyed by a scandal, he was simply rendered irrelevant. The town rallied, but not around him. Firefighters, families, and local officials flooded social media with gratitude for Emberline. The narrative shifted from local official's daughter to the woman who saved us. A week later, the county board held an emergency meeting to vote on fully adopting the Emberline system. I watched the live stream from my new office in Palo Alto. Dad was there, sitting at the end of the table. He looked smaller, his voice absent from the discussion. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. The motion passed. A local reporter tried to ask Dad for a comment afterward, but he just waved a hand and walked away, a ghost in the machine he used to control. The power had shifted silently and permanently. I didn't stop at the software. My revenge wasn't about destruction, it was about construction. I used the capital from the IPO to launch a series of initiatives that hit closer to home than my parents could have imagined. I created the Spark Scholarship for girls in rural counties who wanted to study engineering, girls who were told they were too quiet, too weird, or too focused on hobbies. I fully funded mental health services for wildfire survivors and started a grant to help families rebuild uninsured homes. I made sure of one thing: none of it carried the Jensen family name. It was all under the Emberline Foundation. I was investing in the people my father had overlooked, building the safety net he claimed he couldn't afford. It was a declaration that we didn't need his permission to survive. Months later, Dad came to see me. He had to get a visitor's badge at the front desk of Emberline HQ, a glass and steel fortress that hummed with the energy of 300 employees. When he walked into my office, he looked out of place, clutching his hat like he was at a funeral. He had aged. The scandal of the blocked contract had quietly pushed him into early retirement, and the silence of the house was wearing on him. He sat down and looked at the view of the bay, refusing to meet my eyes. "I thought pushing you down would keep you safe," he said, his voice raspy. "I thought, if I made you small, the world wouldn't hurt you as bad. I wanted you to have a normal life, Ali, not this pressure." It was a rewrite of history, a desperate attempt to frame his ego as protection. I wasn't buying it. "You didn't keep me safe, Dad," I replied, leaning forward over my desk. "You just made me feel like I had to choose between my family and myself. You made me feel like I was the danger." He looked up, then eyes wet. "I just wanted us to be a family." "We are," I said, but I kept my distance. "But the terms have changed. I'm not the daughter you can silence at the dinner table anymore." I offered him a relationship, but it was conditional. No more jokes about real jobs. No more rewriting the past. "You don't get to decide if I exist in this story anymore." I told him, my voice final. "That power is gone." He left an hour later, walking out into a world that I had remade. The real resolution didn't happen in that office, though. It happened a year later during the peak of fire season. I drove back to my hometown not as a returning child, but as an observer. The sky was clear. Emberline's sensors had detected a flare-up in the canyon 2 days prior, and the crews, including my brother's unit, had extinguished it before it could reach the tree line. The evacuation sirens never rang. I stood by the town square, watching the fire trucks roll back into the station, the men laughing and high-fiving, safe and covered in soot. A woman walking her daughter stopped when she saw me. She whispered something to the little girl, who looked up at me with wide, awe-filled eyes. The girl walked over shyly. "My dad said you helped save our house," she said. I looked at her, seeing a reflection of the girl I used to be, scared small, waiting for permission to matter. I smiled, and for the first time in years, the knot in my chest loosened completely. My worth wasn't tethered to my parents' praise anymore. It was written in the servers humming in the cloud, in the maps on the firefighters' screens, and in the dinner tables where families were sitting down to eat safe and together. My dad once tried to erase me from this town's future, but standing there breathing the smoke-free air, I knew the truth. Every safe home was proof that I was here. I looked down at my phone, thinking of that brutal text message one last time. "You're on your own." I smiled as I turned back to my car. Turned out being on my own was the freest I'd ever been. And with that, Alison finally found the recognition she deserved, not from her father, but from the world she helped save. If this story of reclaiming power resonated with you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. What would you have done in her situation? Let us know down below as we read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.